On this issue of leveraging, you used the BCDC example. I mean, I was on that commission when we released that report, and it was, let's just say, to make some local jurisdictions uneasy, and the resistance that they had at the beginning is an understatement. So let's fast forward. Where are some of the other opportunities that we should be looking at as the legislature for this, for the leverage? And we brought up fires. I guess the Sierra.
Well, if I could mention that, the Rim Fire and the King Fire, of course, were disasters in this area, but they cross energy, forestry, the economy, air quality, public health, communication, water, flood, all those areas. How do you get all those people in the same room and talk about how we're going to deal with this particular disaster? We're not structured like that. We all have our stovepipes that we work with at the state government, and we do that very well. But getting all those people together is really difficult. The collaboratives have done that, a start to that around the state in the 5 areas. And even when we get together, we bring 4 representatives from each of the areas together quarterly. We have amazing discussions, and we find out things that nobody knew about, and we come up with ideas about how we can leverage this with you and so on. But locally, just getting PG&E and SMUD together and talking about their plans was amazing, because they, at the staff level, found out things they were doing that could even help each other in our region. So I think we're beginning that discussion, but providing, as Kif said, a way for us to encourage that, help move that forward, best practices and so on. We need to have some type of structure at the state level to think about those conversations and not exactly about the conversations we've been having up and down.
Because there's a challenge with that collaboration, because we had, I remember there's a forest thinning bill that cut out the coastal counties, right? So you have a thinning opportunity for private enterprise to thin their forest, which help out with that. You've got some counties that are not enforcing that 100-foot rule, right? Or many counties that aren't enforcing that, and you've got some residents that don't want to be told by government what to do, even though what we conceivably would be to save their home, while they're up there. So those are, I guess the question is one of the themes is that more science. I'm hearing from the previous panel and from you folks is that at least if the state were going to do one thing with its limited resources, is it may be, hire some scientists and come up with some scientific, protocols on resiliency, or in these different silos. I hate to say that, but the different areas, and then how firefighters and fires and drought and pest and public health all intersect. Is that your comments?
Sure. I think that more science is good, but science around decision support, applied science, some of the comments we made, I also work with ARCA, were around that line, moving away from the science of what is happening to the science of how that turns into a local decision. That's where the local governments need support. They have an incredible capacity to bring together their community, but they lack the scenarios to know where to go and exactly what that might mean. So I would encourage that piece. I also think that convening, setting the stage is a powerful tool that the state can do. So the example I gave of the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program, just by naming adaptation as a criteria for inclusion, you are creating the vehicle for local governments who may already want to do that to start to normalize, to create a vocabulary, to create staffing around that. And the more that that happens from the state, the more that these things will happen. I look at mitigation and the history we have there, which has been phenomenal. Hats off to everybody at the state who worked on those initiatives. We have a professional cadre from the local, regional, state on down of folks who work on mitigation planning. They have vocabulary, they have tools. If you're familiar with the statewide energy efficiency collaborative, the state is now funding a portal operated by ICLEI that allows local governments to do their greenhouse gas inventories for free online, and that's rolling up to the state to get a picture. And I think at last count there was about 500 local governments that have entered data in there. We need that same platform and framework for local governments to work on adaptation, and I think that's a key role the state could play.
I would agree. Because when we get together, for example, around fire, around the issue you mentioned, forest, when we have people from Placer County, Sacramento County, Sierras sitting down talking about their community, multiple different kinds of conversations going on there, they will come up with solutions because it's localized, it's theirs. It's not a state issue, it's our hometown. We could see the King Fire clearly from Sacramento. And when you can see something like that visibly, it becomes an issue that you want to work on and you're willing to sit down and do that.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time this
Thank you
morning
so much.
and your contributions.
Thank you.
Let's turn to an independent perspective. Not that there hasn't these perspectives haven't been independent. We have Carol Delia as Executive Director of the Little Hoover Commission. Good to see you this morning. Thank you for coming and waiting.
Oh, thank you for.
Heard quite a bit.
Oh, yes, and I'll try not to repeat because a lot of what you've heard is particularly from this last panel, very similar to what we've recommended. So I want to thank you, Senator, for inviting the Commission's perspective. And I also want to commend all of the good work that we heard about in the second panel. The Commission was well aware of what was going on with the Climate Action Team and the work they've done. On that note, California has done something that many other states haven't, which is we actually have gotten started on this issue. And to speak to what Senator Pavley said, as the staff of a bipartisan commission here in California, I'm very fortunate that our starting point was not is climate changing, but how do we adapt? And so our recommendations, our report, were driven by some very deep concerns. And I won't re-articulate what was done so well by Dr. Rudolph as far as the health and human consequences, but our commission also was concerned from the standpoint of keeping our $2 trillion economy going and concerns about our trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure on our 1,100 miles of coastline as the tide will rise. So it was keeping our economy going at a time of great uncertainty, as well as the health and human consequences. When we looked at some of the economics, the ports have been in the news lately for the strike. We heard in one of our hearings, we held 3 hearings and 1 advisory committee meeting. We were concerned about the ports, the roads leading to the ports being underwater. So as this urgency to get over the strike, I couldn't help but think, well, what about when the water takes the roads out and we can't get the goods, even if they're on the trucks, we can't get them inland where they need to go. The same concern was raised by a representative of the San Francisco airport, which in addition to Oakland and San Diego will have issues. In that respect, it lends well to what we heard from the last panel where they're trying to do the right thing, but they have so many different levels of government that they have to deal with, and they have to deal with what's going on around them. So it takes a real regional collaboration. So our work came out last summer. It was titled Governing California Through Climate Change. And essentially the report is about how do you govern during a time of extreme uncertainty when history is not going to help you plan for the future. As I said, we had a public process, and we came very much to the same conclusion that you indicated and related to, or mentioned in your opening remarks, and that's that we've done quite a bit. We've done a remarkable amount on mitigation. We're a world leader, and while we're beginning to talk about adaptation, and we truly are grateful that you're having these series of hearings to bring this to the forefront, but our commission found that we haven't placed the same emphasis on adaptation as we have on mitigation. We also, well, I'll echo what we heard from the last panel, that the state really doesn't have one source of information. We have a lot of people doing a lot of great work, and clearly they're working together and collaborating, as many of them said, better than they've done before. But at the end of the day, we still don't have one single authoritative source of information so that the locals and regionals who are doing great work can say, what they want to know is, what do we do? They also told us they didn't want to be scientists, and I think this touches to what you just said, that in addition to having an authoritative source, we need to be using the best science that we can. Finally, in what we heard from the second panel of their collaborations, again, what the last panel had to say was, It's very insular at the state level. You have a lot of state bodies talking to each other, and while that's great, if you're not including the local voices, those people who are actually boots on the ground doing the work, you're missing part of the conversation. We also dedicated one of our hearings to industry, who actually, as someone mentioned, Kaiser, is looking at this both in terms of mitigation and adaptation. And we found various companies that came and spoke to us. I already mentioned the ports and the airports. We also heard from energy or electricity utility companies, and they're concerned about this. And those business and industry should also have a voice. So as the state's doing its planning, it shouldn't be quite so insular as it's been. So with that, we came up with 5 recommendations. 2 of the 5, I think, are very relevant and things that the legislature could consider doing. The other 3 are also important and have also been touched on. But the main recommendation echoes what you just heard from Mr. Schur, and that's that we need some sort of entity at the state level, and whether that's something new, such as a risk council, or whether somebody who is already doing this work is tasked with it. At this juncture, we don't have one single source of information. And then again, to speak to your comment, Senator, that this body should be informed by a independent science advisory body. So we have examples in state government. We have this Delta Stewardship Council, which focuses on the Delta. They're advised by a science body. They should play the lead role so that locals and regionals where to go. I think that although this is not the order of our recommendations, the second thing that was touched on by numerous people, and that's putting adaptation into all aspects of planning. And so that's already starting to happen. I know Deputy Director Curry talked about it in the hazard mitigation plans. We met with them while we were doing our study and talked about how that might work. But I think it's incorporating it everywhere. And I think, as we heard from OPR, and how it's being blended into the general plans, but then how do you get local government to appreciate that? And that's where just even calling it out, naming adaptation as a requirement, as bond money goes out, whether it's the water bond or other bonds that are currently being discussed, making that a requirement, so that gives the muscle, if you will, to enable it to happen. A couple other recommendations I'll touch on briefly, and then I'll answer any questions you might have. Secretary Dooley mentioned the Strategic Growth Council. We looked to the Strategic Growth Council and asked, they're primarily focused on sustainable communities in SB 375. Could they also work adaptation in? And they said yes. With a little bit of additional resources, they felt like they had the right people at the table, as not to be the risk assessment council or the risk council, but to be a source of maybe when there is grant money to ensure that sustainable communities and adaptation are being considered at the same time. We were also told there might be occasions where both of those two are at odds, something you also raised. And that might be a good forum for resolving some of that. Finally, you mentioned this, just the defensible space, with Secretary Laird talking about the emphasis on fire. That's something, the law's already on the books, so just making sure that it's enforced. That's, again, another issue for health when you think about air quality and you think about people losing their homes. And finally, Secretary Laird also talked about some of the maps he saw for Santa Cruz and the land being swallowed by the sea. And our last recommendation has to do with the public trust doctrine, and that's as the sea moves on the land becomes public property, and to get in front of that problem before it's being addressed in the courts. With that, I'll conclude and would welcome any questions.
Let me go for the bait. Let's say we didn't do anything on this sea level rising. What do you envision will happen when, and then we have different administrations, not any of the people that were here, but an aggressive, delineation by the state that these are now public lands. What would that look like across the coast of some of our coastal cities?
Well, you would have people's houses, people who have oceanfront property. As the water line moves up, that becomes public. And that's a huge court battle waiting to happen.
Yeah, but given the state of the, okay, so then I guess the question is given the state of the land or the state of the Constitution right now, our Supreme Court or our courts would be charged with enforcing that. I mean, there's
Yes.
a conflict between personal property rights, but that's on at least my understanding of the Constitution trumps, right? It wins on that. On the first recommendation on an independent agency or the using Secretary Laird's more backbone on the current EPA, which is acting as the head of CAT. Give me some. I mean, I think when you talk about the emphasis, an independent agency certainly sends a message to California and to planners in the world that adaptation is important. Then there's obviously benefits of saying here you have all these agencies. At least it appears that some of the state agencies are talking together. Be helpful if they talk with more regional and local agencies. Can you comment more on the Hoover's recommendation?
Well, I think as you heard articulated by the last panel, as much as they're doing together, there is no authoritative direction on what locals need to do. So while we compliment and commend the Safeguarding California, which was the update in 2014 to the 2009 plan, it doesn't really do anything but provide some advisory information. I think also what's lacking is the specific risk assessment. Again, Mr. Schur referenced the Adapting to Rising Tides, which was done by the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, and that's the level. They can tell you down to the block in Alameda what needs to be planned for. And while many of the larger regions, what we found was Sacramento, the Valley, or the general Sacramento area, not the Central Valley, but LA, San Diego, and the Bay Area were doing a good job of planning. The rest of the state, not so much. So while Adapting to Rising Tides is a good model, it's not something that's yet been done statewide. And that's the kind of lead that we were told. And we had a very complicated advisory committee meeting on risk assessment and exactly what did that mean. And so you have to have some authoritative source at the state combined with locals. So like in LA, there's a UCLA professor who's done great work on looking at exactly how hot it's going to be, not just in the LA greater area, but by community. And so you have to kind of take the science of what's being done locally and then combine it with the authority of the state so that they have the ability to go out and convince their local government bodies that they need to put resources on this. It's really hard to get in front of what's called a slow-moving disaster. You know, if you have Hurricane Katrina or you have Superstorm Sandy, that's when all the resources came out. But we want to see California get in front of that. But it's hard to plan for something that's not going to happen for another generation. But if we wait, it's going to be that much more expensive.
Right, and then you talk, when we isolate it on sea level rising, that phenomena is important. But if you move to some place like Fresno, and you were talking about the public health impacts of the forest fires, the heat, and the drought, you know, so you get the triple combo. I mean, not that you don't have drought and particulate matter in the Bay Area, but it seems like those forces moving together, you have multi-jurisdictions in those areas. It's not like just the city of Fresno you get to talk to. You've got a lot of, and it's not just Fresno. I'm picking that
Right.
area, but I'm just saying is that you've got all the different region and local agencies, and I guess using from the local government commissions, what's in the toolbox for these folks to communicate, and how can, I mean, I guess you're saying that the state, we certainly need to focus on those communications, right?
Right. We need to show that adaptation is as important as mitigation, and I don't think that message is out there yet. And if the state puts that message out there, I think it will help tremendously, and that's by, again, blending it into whatever planning documents the state does and encouraging, if not incentivizing, locals to do the same. And it's with bond money making adaptation a requirement so that it not just forces but encourages and helps those who already want to do this type of effort into doing the adaptation work that needs to be done.
And those are just the first steps. Those are not exclusive. There's other
Oh,
things that we can
absolutely.
do to coordinate or collaborate. Well, thank you. All right. Well, thank you for your comments. And we have the benefit of the report that came out. Now I need to open this up for public comment.
Thank you.
So we have heard from our state, from our regional and independent folks. If there are people that would like to come and add their public comment, please do, and identify yourself, who you're representing, if you're representing yourself. It's still morning, right?
No, way past. Good afternoon, Senator Murkowski. My name is Louis Bloomberg, and I direct the California Climate Change Program for the Nature Conservancy. So I know the hour is short, but let me offer up first that we are eager to work with you on whatever happens out of this hearing. And I want to congratulate you and commend you for holding the hearing, because this is the kind of informational hearing that needs to happen here on this issue. And so thank you for your leadership on this. The Nature Conservancy is an international organization. We've been working on all aspects of climate change, focusing on the role of natural systems as a part of the solution set. And we've heard a lot today. The science is in, the climate is changing, we need to act now. It's a threat to our public health and to the environment, as we talked about, and I was pleased to hear the last two speakers connected the threat to the economy as well, because it's all interconnected. Climate change threatens the whole systems that protect our lives, as Dr. Rudolph so eloquently testified. And as Secretary Laird said, even if we reduce emissions successfully, we're going to deal with these impacts for a long time. So I just want to make three key recommendations to you quickly. The first one is to prioritize the use of natural infrastructure where feasible. This is kinds of things like reconnecting natural floodplains, restoring wetlands and stream banks, protecting our beaches and shorelines, managing our forests ecologically. We know that planners often default to gray infrastructure, or in the Caltrans parlance, protect in place. We believe that nature is an important tool to use in climate change. We have a report here that we did share with your committee staff, and I'll make this available to you, that shows that natural infrastructure, like I mentioned, is cost-effective, it's been successful, it's flexible, it provides multiple benefits, including greenhouse gas reductions and carbon sequestration using the technology known as photosynthesis. Quite simple, it works. And it's popular. It can improve the quality of life in human communities and reduce climate risk. So prioritizing natural infrastructure where feasible is important. The second is really to ensure that the state spends its money wisely. And the last witness made that point. There is no mandate that the state consider climate considerations in the expenditures that it makes in capital outlay projects or in the grants or permitting that it does as well. I would argue the state really doesn't know what the risk is from climate impacts to its own facilities. And it should lead by example by spending its money wisely. And I would point to SB, I think it was 1217 in the last session it died. Senator Leno had a bill that would have made steps in that right direction. So the state should get its own house in order and lead by example and spend its money wisely. And the third point is again, congratulations. This kind of hearing should happen more often. The legislature should provide more oversight, and it should provide direction to the administration on this issue, as the last three speakers have really documented here. We need climate-smart actions. We need oversight. The Climate Action Team has become a state-only organization. In the last administration, they had quarterly public meetings. I learned a lot today because there is no method for the public to understand what they're doing in those committees. But for some of the subgroups, like the public health group and the coastal group, have public elements, but the others don't, and the main one doesn't. And I think finally, you really touched on one of the challenging issues: this relationship between the state and local government, and how to really work that out. And I don't think they're easy answers. I think you've heard that today. But I think there are good suggestions. There are good examples. And having, some entity, some person to be in charge. I thought Secretary Laird was in charge of adaptation, but it wasn't clear in the discussion this morning really who was who's driving the bus here. So with those three recommendations, I'll stop here and again offer our interest in working with you to move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you. Senator Wachowski, Bonnie Holmes-Jan with the American Lung Association in California, and our mission is to protect lung health and prevent lung disease, and one key way we've been focusing on doing that is through supporting strong air quality laws and supporting California's leadership on climate for almost a decade here. And as we're, three key points, as we're nearing the release of the date of our State of the Air, we're nearing the release of our State of the Air report, which is going to be in April this year. And every year with our State of the Air, we give grades and rankings and progress reports. Over the 15 years we've been tracking air quality in California. And this reminds us that, and of course, California always gets a lot of poor grades, unfortunately, but we do focus on the progress that we're making and the importance of our state laws. But it reminds us that climate change is already adding to the public health burden of air pollution. And we already are experiencing thousands of premature deaths and hundreds of thousands of asthma attacks and lost work days, lost school days, and others, and the warming temperature and the conditions, the weather conditions that go along with climate change are, of course, worsening our ozone pollution, threatening to overwhelm the efforts that we're already making to control air pollution. All of the work that we're doing with our local air quality management districts and our state air board is at risk because of our warming temperatures. And in fact, there are studies that demonstrate we could have increased number of ozone days in 2050 significantly because of climate. So, and physicians are already seeing an increase in chronic diseases, as you've heard, related to air pollution. All that points to the fact that we need to be working on a number of solutions, both on mitigation and adaptation. One key solution that I think speaks to both that really needs more focus and attention is healthy growth. And you've heard a little bit about that today, but I think it's important to remember that sustainable community strategies under SB 375 are helping to re-envision how our communities can grow healthier with more compact transit-oriented development and a focus on transportation options, biking, walking, transit. This is the essence of building resilient communities and a pathway to reducing respiratory illnesses, to reducing obesity and a whole range of chronic illnesses, including heart disease and diabetes. And there are a number of things that need to be done. You've heard a lot of lists, but just a quick list that the State Air Board is going to be reviewing regional greenhouse gas reduction targets again this year. We need those to be strong targets and getting stronger. That at the state level, we need state level support and focus on the implementation of local sustainable community strategies. That we need not only the cap and trade funds, which are providing a tremendous step forward to assisting local communities, but we need a broader realignment of our state transportation funding to support sustainable communities projects at the local level and sustainable community models. We need more models in diverse communities, not just dense urban communities, but also in rural areas to show what healthy growth looks like. There's a lot that we need to do, and we need the state's help in this and the state focus that this is a key adaptation effort. And just to close, I would like to say messaging has come up a lot. And at the Lung Association, we're working on a lot of messaging strategies to help highlight the medical and health community's strong support for California's leadership on climate and clean air policies and to make this a link between climate and health. One key campaign we have right now is our Doctors for Climate Health, and we have a number of memes, and I can pass this on to you, and I can tweet it to you and post it. And we're putting out these memes every week with doctors with their personal statement about what climate and health means to them and why they're engaged in the battle to reduce climate emissions and to protect air quality in California. Messages from California's leadership is keeping my patients healthy, to invest in health, not harmful fuels. All communities deserve a healthy climate. And again, these are all physicians with their own personal stories and quotes. So we want to work with you. Thank you for holding this hearing, and we will follow up with more ideas afterwards too.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Joel Bittner. I'm representing the Mosquito and Vector Control Association of California, and I'm also the general manager of Placer Mosquito Control District. Thank you again for allowing me this time to to speak about public health risk of vectors and vector-borne disease. I noticed there was a bit of a theme earlier in the meeting, so thank you for having our issues at the front of your mind. We are seeing impacts from climate change, and I will go quickly through these. Currently, West Nile virus is being affected, as was actually well reported in a SACB article yesterday. Under drought conditions and really warm winters, we're seeing actually more West Nile virus circulating in the environment. Last year had the highest number of West Nile human cases since 2005. This is a trend we've been seeing over the past several years. And we're also seeing warmer winters causing a better foothold of some invasive mosquitoes that have come into Southern California and are spreading northward through California. The concern with these invasive mosquitoes is that they bring with them the possibility to circulate new diseases, chikungunya and dengue fever. And what was even more disturbing is a report released from Department of Public Health says in 2014, 110 imported human cases of these diseases were reported in the counties where these new invasive mosquito vectors are found. So it's really just a matter of time. This relates to the climate change issue. Is these are tropical mosquitoes and tropical diseases. So as we see over time more warm winters, changes in climate in the direction that we've been seeing, we would expect more of these sorts of changes. From our perspective, our association represents about 65 different local mosquito control districts. And internally, we are all trying to increase our capacity to adapt to some of these forthcoming challenges. Up till now, we've really focused on West Nile, and just operationally and scientifically, there's the West Nile way, and then there's the new way for the new challenges. So that's taking quite a bit of effort. What we're asking from the state is really to continue to support us through our partnerships. We have I've had a very long and strong partnership with California Department of Public Health Vector-Borne Disease Section and the University of California, specifically the Center for Vector-Borne Disease at UC Davis houses a statewide database that we use quite extensively. It's the only one of its kind in the country that's helping us try to stay ahead of these issues. In our business, you can't get caught behind the mosquitoes. You have to stay out in front of it. So we have been planning on these things for some time, and we're going to need to continue to do that. And we do ask the state to reinstate research funding that may have evaporated, shall we say, during the past few years, because it's really sorely needed to make sure that we can stay ahead of this, both from the science standpoint and from supporting our local agencies.
Yeah, skeeters always scare me, so more skeeters scare me more. Our next public input.
Thanks so much. Phoebe Seaton with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. I really just want to highlight a couple things that others have said before me. I think that the opening presentation in Department of Public Health really highlighted the need to focus and prioritize the most vulnerable communities through both adaptation and mitigation. Those communities most impacted by climate change. We work primarily in the San Joaquin Valley and the Coachella Valley with lower income communities and trying to lead efforts to incorporate those communities into climate change efforts. So making sure at the local and the statewide level, those communities are engaged in decision making, and at the same time that the solutions and measures are benefiting those communities. Also, I want to just highlight a point that that Bonnie made with the American Lung Association around the entire state and the importance of focusing on the entire state and rural communities in particular as a place heavily impacted environmentally and economically, public health-wise by climate change, with huge opportunities through both adaptation and mitigation, and making sure those communities are incorporated into efforts. I believe the chair asked for examples. One example that we've worked on in the San Joaquin Valley is really focusing on investments in existing communities to address proximity and access to important services and goods. And we see that as a way to both mitigate the vehicle miles traveled and the need to sprawl, and as an adaptation mechanism to increase proximity to services. And that's it. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, and I'll close the public hearing now. But, we're all going to be impacted on climate change. Unfortunately, what we forget is the rest of us that the disadvantaged communities who are already being adversely affected will be more adversely affected. So thank you for your public comments, and I'm going to call this hearing to a conclusion and let everybody know that the Senate Environmental Quality Committee will take this show on the road. We plan to have a series of regional hearings on the same matter to reach out to the private sector, what their input may be, some of the actual local governments that are doing things or not doing things, if the state may be, and also those pesky state agencies in their regional boards and how they're working collaboratively or not with the folks on in the district. So thank you very much, and this meeting is adjourned.